Hi, Cynthia, and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast. How are you?
Hi, Anna. It's wonderful to see you. I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Beautiful. It's beautiful to have you on. I really look forward to hearing your birth stories and birthing wisdom. So, yes, the first time we met was about 1.5 years ago when I came to your beautiful podcast, Down to Birth show. And since then, I wanted you to come on and share your birth stories, but we just haven't been aligned until now. And so, very happy that the stars aligned for you to come on and share your birth stories.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so with no further ado, please take us back to when you conceived your first baby and how that unfolded to where you are today.
Sure. Well, the young woman I was then, young, married a couple of years to my husband at that time. And I remember going to a GYN appointment, my annual GYN, and I was just barely starting to think about maybe having a baby in the coming years. And I asked the doctor if she had any tips or thoughts. And she's like, you know what? I always tell people to just give it a good year to just, to see if it'll happen and just like see how that goes. And I remember just being immediately filled with fear, like, oh my God, it doesn't take much for some women, myself included, to have the mind run rampant when you hear something like that. And um, when she said give it a year, I thought, oh my gosh, that's such a long time. And then another year before I would have the baby. And I started to think about conception all the time after that conversation with her. So at some point, I don't remember exactly how many months later, but we decided to be willing to conceive. And we conceived on one try. So it was like, boom, you're pregnant. And it's sometimes some women like me, we sometimes feel a little guilty sharing that because obviously there are millions of women who go through the most excruciating struggles and pain trying to conceive. And I know we sometimes just feel bad. That just is the story though. I conceived on one try. And as wonderful as that is, and what a beautiful blessing that is, I do want to also say that it is very much the feeling of having the rug pulled out from under you, especially when someone planted the seed that you better give it a good year before it may happen. And it's just like blink and you're pregnant. And I just like the mind just goes crazy. I was a corporate executive at MasterCard at the time. So I had a pretty fulfilling, exciting career. I traveled internationally from continent to continent, negotiating collateral with the CEOs and CFOs of some of the world's biggest banks. And it was a really exciting part of my life. And I was a finance professor at UConn for a decade, which I did evenings and weekends. So that was smack in the middle of my professorship there as well. And just the concept of like, wow, a year from now, I won't be doing any of these, or I certainly won't be in my corporate job. It just seemed very sudden. And
Yeah.
it was wonderful. And I was happy and I was grateful and I was terrified. And in my mind, I thought, oh my gosh, like now where do I go? Where do I turn? And for some reason, I don't know why it didn't occur to me sooner, but that's when it clicked that the woman I had seen for 5 minutes once a year for my annual GYN would become my obstetrician. Like, oh, she was only a gynecologist and now she's my obstetrician. And I talk about that moment of my life because I say, isn't it remarkable that I concluded that would be my person without a second thought? Just like she instantly is granted the privilege of attending my birth. Why? Because when I moved to Connecticut, someone recommended her as a GYN and just like boom, now I'm just instantly going to let that person become one of the most influential people in the most transformative experience of my life without a second consideration, even though we have hundreds, if not thousands, of such providers in my 40-mile radius right here. We have so many GYNs around here. I'm sure that's an exaggeration, but we have 5 or 6 major hospitals, each of which serve around 2 to 3,000 women per year in labor. So there's really an abundance of options, but that thought didn't even cross my mind. And I think most women put more thought into who they're going to use as a real estate agent, maybe even finding the best dry cleaner in town before choosing their obstetrician with so much thought. But that's who I was. That's what I did. I just thought, I guess it'll be. that woman, that doctor.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I mean, I think it's where we will head to with your births and who you are today. I just love that's where you come from. Because I mean, that's also just like you say, kind of the general population, most women probably have that reaction too, that they go to the GYN.
Yeah. You know, my son's birth story was published in magazines, in many magazines around the world, and Mothering Magazine was the first to publish it. And they rejected 99% of article submissions. They accepted my submission, and they ended up making it the feature story of their annual pregnancy special. And sometimes I look back and say, why did they do that with my story? And I realize it wasn't the story itself. It was the fact that I began as such an incredibly uninformed, unempowered woman with respect to my birth. And what's interesting is I was completely empowered in my personal life, in my relationships in my life, in my corporate career. I was feeling so competent in my life. And it was like overnight, I didn't see that woman anymore. You know, when you go to a GYN appointment, I mean, it's just think about it. You're in that room, you're naked, they're clothed. In fact, they're in a white coat. You're stark naked, and you've got a little maybe papery thing covering you, and you're sitting on a table so high that your legs are dangling off, which is the experience we have when we're little kids. I mean, I'm the youngest in my family, and I remember the years it took me to look forward to my dangling legs to touch the floor in my classroom at school or at the dinner table at home. And you don't think you're ever going to have that experience again in life, that you're sitting in a chair and your legs are dangling off. So, and you're stripped quite physically of all the things that make you feel competent. I
Yeah.
wasn't wearing, the clothing I wore to work. I wasn't in my space. And just, I think something just happens to us when we're in that environment. And now we're facing something that we've only heard negative things about our whole life.
Sure.
It's just a culmination of so many difficult emotional experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And it's
So
something that also those people in the white coat tend to also have that kind of I am expert and authority over energy, right? Even if they're lovely people, just the way they talk and explain things or don't explain things or tell us this is what you do and this is what I'm gonna do to you now. The whole language kind of puts us there as well.
that's exactly right. Yeah. So I started seeing my doctor, and I was so excited for the first appointment. And I remember at that first appointment, I couldn't go till I was 7.5 weeks pregnant, according to my own tracking. And when I went there, I look back and I just see it all so differently. She did an intrauterine ultrasound with the wand, which I regret. I didn't know any of these things. And she was very serious. And she put it in and she looked at the ultrasound and said, okay, well, you're pregnant. You're definitely pregnant. And my first thought was, I know I'm pregnant. That's why I'm here. Is that why I'm in this room? So you can tell me that I'm pregnant? It was funny. And then she said, and it's just a singleton. It's one baby. And I was like, right, okay, right. The other thought didn't cross my mind. And okay, come back in a few weeks. It was just so strange to me. But it was exciting. It was wonderful. And I was really excited about how I just felt very grateful to have this experience in life. It was the most important thing to me, and is a beautiful experience. But what started happening for me was I had always my undergraduate degree is in sociology, and I really believe that has shaped me on a constant basis. I think it has completely permanently affected my thinking. And I really believe everyone should study sociology, because I'm very grateful that that's the major I chose when I was in college. It just changes the way you see the world, the way you understand people. You see everything through the realm of culture, which is really a very important way to look at the world. And I had this mind that was always perceiving birth without consciously being aware I was doing it. And what I mean by that is, when I was a teenager, it was the first time I heard or met anyone who had had a cesarean section. And I was fascinated. I was like, wait a minute, how did she? What happened? It was my sister-in-law's friend. I was like, wait, what? So how? Why did it happen like this? My mom is very small framed. Her pre-pregnancy size, she's not so different even today, but like pre-pregnancy, 5'6", 110 pounds, very small framed woman. My brothers were big, and then I was even bigger. I was 10'3" at birth. And it didn't occur to anyone. No one ever said, um, did you have a C-section to my mom? When my birth story came up, everyone laughed about how big I was. And once in a while, someone said, did you have gestational diabetes? And I would think, what was that? But no one said, and you had her vaginally? That didn't happen. So the one thing I wasn't afraid of was a big baby, because that to me was the most normal thing in the world. Um, but I did start to perceive that in the previous, let's say, 15 years of my life, I went from realizing that cesarean sections were a surprising anomaly of sorts to the most mundane, commonplace thing I ever knew. I mean, at MasterCard, every woman that I worked closely with, and the man and the wife of every guy on my staff, every single one of them had a C-section. And I remember them saying things like, yeah, well, the hips just don't, I don't know, there's something wrong with the hips in my family. And another woman at work said, oh, my baby would still be in me. Believe me, my baby would never come out. So this is just how society spreads these comments, and they infiltrate our minds even unconsciously. But I was thinking, why did it change? I remember a time in very recent history, this was a big deal and it wasn't commonplace. And that's what worries about. That's what I worry about for with today's women. They won't be able to recall a time where this was an anomaly. All they know is that this has been totally normalized. So for me, I did recognize a deep longing for a vaginal birth, and yet I was terrified to have one. It was such an uncomfortable place to be, because it's what I wanted more than anything, and it's what scared me more than anything.
Oh, why? Like, can you remember why you wanted that when all the people around you didn't? Like, what was it that, is it because of the story of your mother? Or is it because of your mother and how
I
she
think
birthed?
I think it's because of my dad.
Oh,
My dad, I'm so much like my mom, and obviously I think my parents have influenced me equally, but my father influenced me in just a precious way in my life. And I give him all the credit for this. He taught me at a very young age and every day of my life that nature knows what it's doing, that nature is the smartest force on earth, and that it's always serving us. It's always serving us. I have early memories when there were a few years of my life where, whether I was in middle school, I would get a fever at school, the nurse would send me home, I had the flu, I had something. My mother worked as a speech pathologist in a school, so she had less flexibility than my father, who worked in a corporate job. So when I was being sent home from school, I would, my father was the one who would meet me at home and sit at my side and look out for me, because he could leave work more easily than she. And I just have such a strong memory of him just sitting there very calmly, never a worried look on his face. And he would just smile calmly and say, yeah, well, Cynthia, you've got a virus, and your body's heating up to kill that virus. And that's what you want to do. So stay comfortable and stay warm. And here's how your body works. And my mother would come home with this worried look on her face, this knot between her brow, almost frantically searching the house for like something to like take down the fever. And my father would say, no, no, your body knows what it's doing. Your body, just stay hydrated. It just somehow crept into my mind. He also had a very, very charming Yogi Berra type humor. He was very quick-witted and very, very clever with words. And just another quick example of my dad was, once as a teenager, I hesitated in front of him and my mom once. And I said, I think I'm getting, how do you know if you're getting a headache? I think I'm getting a headache. And my dad said, that's all in your head. So he always had this message of like, trust your body is working well. And whether it's not about whether he was right or wrong, right? We don't have to decide whether we agree or disagree. And I teach this to my hypnobirthing clients. It's not about whether someone's beliefs are good or bad or right or wrong. It's very easy to judge other people's beliefs. But the only question we need to ask is, do those beliefs serve you or do they not? And when my father taught me to trust nature and to trust my body, I can say that those beliefs served me. And that's, I believe, what came through in full force when I was pregnant, in longing for the experience that I was designed to have.
yeah.
But that's a difficult place to be, because we have to recognize that cesarean sections are also, like, let it be said, a blessing of the modern era if they were not so overused and exploited and women were manipulated and coerced and pressured into these procedures. Like, we can't get hell bent on the kind of birth we're going to have.
Yeah.
We have to allow this little window of, but what if I actually am one of the women who will benefit from that instead? So that's a harder place to be than the one who gets hell bent.
Mm.
So, how do you navigate your way between these two things? It's not like just deciding to, I don't know. There are many decisions in life that are black and white, and this one is one where we cannot be. So therefore, what do? We have to get educated. So what happened for me, I had no conscious plan to get educated at all. I wasn't even really thinking about it. I was still in the mindset of, well, I have a doctor and obviously she wants what's best. Obviously, I'm in good hands. An interesting conclusion I came to with really no evidence. But I was on the internet one day in my office at Mastercard because I was pregnant and obviously my mind was wandering a lot. And I encountered this blog post of a woman who showed and described the home birth to her third baby. And I was just like, whoa, I cannot believe I'm going to get to see this. And it's funny, I was coming from the place of thinking, okay, here's a woman, photos and all. How bad is it? How bad is it? Show me how painful it is. Show me how bad it is. Let me see. Let me really read what one woman says who definitely didn't have an epidural. So I started reading her birth story and I got lost in it. I was scrolling. It was mesmerizing. She had photos and I was reading and reading and reading. And I will never forget that there was finally a photo of the baby coming out. It wasn't exactly a crowning photo, but the baby was coming out. It was quite clear. And the two older children were very calmly standing there watching. So I knew they weren't traumatized because the mother was obviously calm. And most remarkably, I think this was a separate photo, there was an image of the mother smiling like this and nuzzling nose to nose with her husband while the baby was coming out. And that blew my mind. And I swear my first thought was, did someone doctor this photo? Like, I know women have given birth naturally since the beginning of time, but I thought it was hell. I thought it was torture. I thought they were only happy after it was over. But right in the middle of it, she was smiling and nuzzling intimately with her husband. Blew my mind. And I felt a sensation in my chest that felt like pressure. It felt like there was pressure on my chest. So I had my hand on the mouse and I put my other hand on my chest and I closed my eyes. And I just very quickly said to myself, what's going on here? What are you feeling? What is this? And the answer that came right up was longing.
Mm.
And that was the moment I admitted to myself that it would just be so incredible to have not just a healthy, successful birth, a beautiful birth, a happy story to share with my child. It just was a new concept to me. What if the birth itself is a beautiful, intimate, fulfilling experience? And that's what I felt in my chest. It was longing. I immediately spoke over the longing and said, well, she's special. I'm not. She was probably raised by hippies or something. I'm metropolitan. I don't know people like that. She's so lucky. I wish I could be her for a day. I wish I could know what it's like to be a woman like that. But women like me don't birth like that. So, wow, good for her. What would it be like to be her? But too bad that's not for me.
Mm.
So I dismissed the longing, which is something I would never do again now, knowing how important intuition is in life. But I was a young woman, as I said. At the end of her story, she said, listen, whoever you are, if you're pregnant and you see this, buy this book. And I just bought this book for a woman who works for me last week because she's a new aspiring doula, The Thinking Woman's Guide to a Better Birth by Hensi Goer.
Mm.
And I said, this is a sign. This is why I found this blog. It was actually twofold. It was also because I had to recognize my own longing, but I didn't realize that. Okay, I can read a book. I'll buy a book. That's easy for me. That's not outside of my comfort zone. So I bought the book. I started reading it. It was outside of my comfort zone, turns out, because the experience of having the blinders taken off is not for everyone. I mean, when you look at how animals are killed for meat, how the plastics industry, there are so many documentaries where we're like, turn it off. I can't take the discomfort. I can't take the discomfort of having the blinders taken off. And there are people who say, nope, show it to me. I'm uncomfortable. And yes, I realize by the end of this movie or book, I'm going to have to change my life, but you go forward anyway. That was the feeling I had when I was reading the book. I remember at one point actually turning it down in my lap and saying, I don't know if I can keep reading this. It was so much information at once. And when I talk to clients, I say, you're going to have the same experience. You are going to become wildly informed, and it is uncomfortable, but get through to the other side and see where you are.
Wow.
So one, a few things I learned were just that this is the only nation in the United States where this is a for-profit industry. And I have obviously I've done tons of research since then. Stephen Brill did an outstanding expose in Time magazine, and I believe it was February of 2012, really educating all of us on this industry in this country. And in the late 80s, the pharmaceutical and hospital lobby appealed to Ronald Reagan's Congress and successfully achieved the status of nonprofit with a major loophole. The hospitals became, quote, nonprofit. And the loophole is that they could still enjoy all the benefits of all the corporations in the country, but they would no longer pay federal income tax. And in the 80s, federal income tax, corporate income tax, which is only 21% today in America, was between 46 and 51%. So it was about half of their earnings. And they successfully got Congress to say, okay, you don't have to pay corporate federal income tax anymore. However, you're still allowed multi-million-dollar salaries and your bonuses and your huge advertising budgets. And that became the year, the safest year to give birth in the United States was the year that was signed. And ever since the signature on that bill, it's become increasingly less safe to give birth in the United States because conflicts of interest abounded. So in 1970, we had a 5% cesarean rate in this nation, 1 in 20 women. In the 80s, it was 1 in 10. Early 90s, it was 1 in 5, 20% of women. Late 90s, 1 in 4. Today, 1 in 3. So this was uncomfortable for a woman who was planning a hospital birth. I went to my doctor appointment, and I couldn't wait for this appointment now that I was becoming a little bit informed. I was going to ask her what her cesarean rate was in that practice of about 8 doctors.
Wow.
Because I had learned by then, well, it's an interesting thing because you never know if they'll tell you the truth. They don't audit, they should audit these things, but they don't. I can't believe that they don't with our mortality rates in this country. You'd think that they would, that it would be a law, but that they would have to publish this information and that it would be audited. But no, not at all. But I had learned that the World Health Organization did this big worldwide study in the 80s, and they haven't changed their stance on this. The tipping point for cesarean rates nationally, because it shouldn't be 0%. We don't want no cesareans, but they said it should be about 10%. And then they did have a little footnote for the most impoverished, malnourished populations, maybe upwards of 15, but a solid 10% max for the Western world. So I went to my appointment so naively, wishing and hoping that it would be around 10%, because then wouldn't my life be so easy if she said that? It's not what happened. She came in. Oh, by the way, she was always over an hour late for every appointment. Always. And even at my annual checkups, I would never see a doctor now who was regularly so late. But again, this mindset didn't matter what my job was and my demands. The mindset, the unspoken agreement when someone is late for you, that late, not even with an apology ever, is that they're more important.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine meeting a friend for dinner and being even 15 minutes late without an apology? But if you imagine now, if you walk in and you're an hour late and you don't even apologize, how powerful that is. If the friend waited and accepted the lack of apology and still had dinner with you, that's what's happening when women are waiting a long time for appointments. And I always made the first appointment of the day when I was seeing her annually for my GYN, always 8 a.m. so I could get to work. She never took me before 9. So it was the same way when I was pregnant. It was brutal.
Wow.
Yeah. So she finally came in, and I said, well, oh, I've got to ask you a question. I've been waiting to ask you a question. And she said, sure, what is it? What's your cesarean rate in this group? And she said, I'm Cynthia. I mean, I don't, why are you asking that? Where is this coming from? Why are you asking? And I said, well, what do you mean? I'm just wondering what your cesarean rate is. Well, I don't know. We haven't done those numbers in years. It's so insignificant. It's so irrelevant. And I was crestfallen because I was banking on that answer. I knew now from Hensi Goer's book, like, you need this information. And I
Mm.
thought, well, now what do I do? So I said, well, what do you think it is? I mean, if you're attending births all day, I mean, is it, what percentage of the women? What do you think it is? She said, I told you, I don't know. And I said, okay, well, the World Health Organization, I actually said this, the World Health Organization says it like the tipping point is around 10%. Do you think it's higher or lower in that or than that? She kind of blurted out a laugh, like she was like, it's higher than that. Okay. And I said, well, how much higher then? I mean, the national average is 28%, which it was back then. It's higher now. And I said, do you think you're higher or lower than the national average? And she said, look, I'm not going to lie to you. It's higher than that. And I said, okay, do you think it's 35%? Do you think it's 45%? Do you think it's 50%? And she said, I don't know. It's somewhere around there. And
Wow.
I said, it's somewhere around 50%. I was as healthy, young, vibrant, low risk as can be. This
Yeah.
was not a high risk practice. And she said, yes, it's somewhere around that. And I could not even believe my ears. And I said to her, why? I just don't understand why. Why is everyone having a cesarean section these days? What's the reason for it? And she sighed and pushed her stool back a little bit and said, look, I don't like if the mother is too young. I don't like if she's too old. I don't like if she's too thin. I don't like if she's overweight. I don't like if the baby measures small or if the baby measures large or if the baby arrives early or if the baby arrives late or if she has multiples or gestational diabetes or placenta previa or failure to progress.
Ay, ay,
And that's where I start teaching people about rhetoric,
yeah.
because had I known more in that moment, I would have recognized she was not speaking to me like the perfectly intelligent woman I am. She was not speaking to me as the primary person responsible for the outcome of this birth. She was covering all bases. I don't like this and I don't like that. I got you at both ends. I don't like if you're too, I was very lean and fit and yoga practicing. And she, in fact, was probably, I mean, she really didn't look healthy. She was probably at least 80, 90 pounds overweight. So even the thought of like, wait a second, do you think I'm too thin? Like, what did she mean by that? The mind goes nuts. There's no framework for anything that she's saying. So the first thing that happened was I said to her, what was that last thing you just said? Failure to progress? What's that?
Mm.
Because I didn't know it was the number one reason for cesarean section in the United States.
Still
I
is.
said, I said, what is that? And she said, with a little tap of her hands, she said, I'm going to need to see you dilate at least a centimeter an hour.
Yeah.
I'm going to need to see.
Mm.
I'm serving her. Like,
Mm.
we're both forgetting who hired whom.
Yes.
This is what she needs from me.
Mhm.
I said, 10 hours or less. I don't understand. I was just reading about birth, and there's the first stage, which can last 10, 20, 30, 40, any amount of time, days. And then there's active labor, and active labor on average is at least 14 hours or so. What part of this birth needs to be 10 hours or less? She said, the whole thing till you're 10 centimeters. And I said, but I don't even understand how that's statistically possible. And she said, nonetheless, that's what I like to see.
Yeah.
And I said, all of my mother's births were over 12 hours.
Mm.
And she just looked at me blankly, like, well, good luck to you. That was kind of how she, and I said, well, wait a second. I'm not done with this. So let me understand this. If I labor at home for 6 hours and come to the hospital, how much time do I get? I hate that I even said language like that. How much time do I get? Because I
You were
can take,
negotiating with her though, like it's
right.
understandable. You were trusting her. She was your expert and she was going to care for you. Yeah.
Exactly. That's right. That's right. I said, so if I'm home for 6 hours and come here, how much time do I get? And you'd think any logical person would think she should say 4 hours because this 10-hour number is so concerning, obviously. She said, no, you get 10. And rather than thinking that's a good thing, I thought, well, your logic isn't adding up now. So I said, so what if I labor at home for 24 hours and I come in? She said, you get 10. And I finally said, what if I'm out to dinner with my husband in a restaurant? I go into labor and we come right here. And she said, you get 10.
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh, you're not remotely concerned with how long my labor will last. You are very concerned with how long I'll be in this room.
How long she has to attend to you. Not attend to you though. She will come in at the end or once in a while. She won't be there for those 10 hours, but she'll be kind of on call for those
She'll
hours.
have to deal with me for 10 hours in her mind.
Deal with you, yes.
So, in that moment, when I sat there in complete disbelief and confusion, like, what is going on? This doesn't even make sense. Like, how does she get away with treating an enormous client base with this kind of logic? Like, how am I the crazy one or is she the crazy one? And at that point, it's incredible, really. She scooted her little stool on wheels up to me, just without a word. She, at that point in the conversation, she scooted up to me, without a word, lifted the papery gown I was wearing, exposing my abdomen down to my feet. My underwear was on. She touched me right above my underwear line with her pinky. She touched me and she marked on my body where she would be placing the incision. And she said, Cynthia, look, this is where the incision goes. You can wear a bikini afterwards. A bikini will cover the scar, is
Oh,
what she said. And it's hard to describe what happened for me in that moment because what what she did for me in all her presumptuousness of lifting my gown, touching me. Obviously, I didn't want a C-section, making it so like touching me, normalizing it, talking to me like that. It occurred to me that the concept of a scar never crossed my mind. I never asked a doctor, will I get stretch marks? I never said to one soul, will my breasts change when I breastfeed? I never concerned myself with how my body might change after going through my experience. And the fact that she so grossly misunderstood my reading, my questions, my analyses, she thought this was because of my vanity
mm,
around a scar.
mm.
Like, could we have been on different planets? Am I the first client you've ever had? I was thinking, who's ever actually wanted a vaginal birth for the sake of having a vaginal birth?
Yeah.
Or is this scar versus no scar to you? I just thought we're on different planets. And I don't think she recognized it. I think I did.
Yeah.
So I just walked out of there in a daze. And that's how my appointments went. By my 16-week checkup, they did another ultrasound. And it was at that checkup, they were expressing concern and they were saying, we need to see you again in 2 weeks. And I was so scared because I hadn't had an anatomy scan yet, but obviously they were able to see a lot of things by 16 weeks. And I was terrified what they were starting to see to the point where they said, we need to see you in 2 more weeks. Absolutely terrified. And the doctor walked away thoughtlessly, like, what do you mean 2 weeks? Why do I need to come back in 2 weeks? What happened? Did you see something? Please tell me what's happening. Walked right off. This was a colleague of my doctor. It was a man. And the nurse said, oh, don't worry. He's just afraid that baby of yours is getting a little too big. And I was like, I'm 16 weeks pregnant. He wants me to book extra ultrasounds to do what exactly?
You shouldn't
If
even have had that 16-week one. Like that's totally,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
they're billing for it. This is the United States.
Yeah.
They can bill for everything they do and these extra appointments.
Right.
And just the whole idea of watching this baby, there isn't a too big. That's something I reject for many reasons. It's related to fetal positioning, not weight of baby for many reasons. But I didn't know that at the time. But I thought, even if the baby is big, what are we going to do about it? Keep looking at it and saying, boy, that's a big baby. What can you do at 18 weeks?
I love that that was your reaction. I love that that was your conclusion of that. Yay for young you who were like discovering things. But I love that that was your reaction because most would just be terrified. And of course, we have to monitor it because, of course, they have a solution. but they don't. There's no
Well,
solution until the baby's born.
well,
Like,
remember the one thing I didn't fear was a big baby.
big baby, yeah, right. Because
Like, unlike everyone else, because I was over 10 pounds as a baby and my mom is so small. It's the one thing that just didn't exist to me. So they were never going to get me on that.
yeah.
But I'll tell you, like, even when we did the Down syndrome screening, I don't know, I just did all those tests because they asked me to at the time. I remember when she said, well, it's about 1 in 8,000 or something like that. And she had a very serious face on, and I wasn't sure I was understanding her correctly. And I said, oh, okay. So the odds are very, very low then, right? I mean, that's what you're saying. And she said, I mean, you could be that one.
Oh my God, that was her
And
language.
and then she said, so we recommend you do the CVS test. And I said, well, the CVS test I read has a 1 in 200 chance of losing the baby, which
That
of
was her
course is the
excuse.
biggest nightmare of like, her response was, well, if that happens, it's purely procedural. Like, then it won't be my fault. I said, no, thank you. I'm good. Like, it was just, I was lucky. I was lucky that she was so extreme.
True.
I work with so many clients who have a quicker intuition than I had, a quicker response. I had to be clubbed over the head repeatedly with how terrible this doctor was. I
Yeah.
had to constantly be reminded by things they were doing. And finally, after they told me to go in 2 more weeks, that was my breaking point. I walked out, I didn't book it. I was in a daze. I was still just until that was the day I told everyone at work I was pregnant. Um, so I was really able to hide it in my first pregnancy. I looked more pregnant at 8 weeks the second time around than I did at 16 weeks the first time around. Um, and I just thought that it's unbelievable. They were talking to me about the baby being too big. I went home that night and I was just in so much distress. I was with my husband and I said, the more I learn, the more I'm recognizing that my fear isn't birth. It's a provider like this. It's an experience like this. And she has this great reputation, whatever that means. And I don't know where else to go. And I don't know what else to do. And you feel so trapped. And my husband is the one, and he studied science. So he's the last person I ever expected to be more naturally inclined. I was always the one pulling us in that direction. But he really changed our experience by saying, why don't we just check and see if there's like a birthing center or a midwife or and I said, well, I don't know, because then I would be obligated to a natural birth if it's a birthing center. And I just don't know that I can commit to a natural birth. I don't know yet. He said, let's just check, which I've now been able to say to thousands of women, and it's changed their lives just because he said it to me. Let's just check.
Yeah.
And a day later, we switched to a birthing center in Danbury, Connecticut. And it was the right choice. When I made that change, oh, I didn't tell you one little detail I do think is important. We did hire a doula because I obviously did the research and heard that was just the easiest money I could spend, no matter what a doula costs. It's kind of the easiest money you can spend when you see the statistics on it. So my doula said, oh, just make sure it's okay to have a doula at Stanford Hospital. And at my next appointment, I said to my doctor's colleague, this time it was a female colleague of hers, oh, I have a doula. We got a doula. Is that okay? And the doctor said, oh, you sure you want to spend all that money on a doula? And I said, like, first of all, it's not at all her business or concern, but I also thought, you're one to talk. You're going to make like so much more money from my pregnancy and birth than that woman is.
Yeah.
And I said, yes, no, we're fine with that. I just need to make sure it's okay. And she said, that's fine. That's fine. Just make sure your doula remembers who's in charge.
That's
And
it.
unbelievably, I went home and called my doula. This was pre iPhone, so I didn't text her. And I said, no, she said it's fine, just for you to remember who's in charge. And my doula said the magic words. She said, of course I remember who's in charge. You are.
Yes.
And that's when it clicked.
Yeah.
It just clicked. I thought I was hiring people at MasterCard. It was a lifestyle of mine to interview and hire people. It was a big lifestyle of mine, my entire corporate career. Suddenly, I forgot that I was in that role again. I'm just interviewing and hiring someone again. So I tell women in your prenatal visit, in your mind, you talk to your baby before you walk in and say, I'm interviewing again. This is another interview. Don't worry. I'm going to keep making sure this is the best person for us. View every prenatal as an interview where you keep evaluating whether they get the privilege of attending your birth.
Mhm.
I had to be clubbed over the head. So we switched to a birthing center. My doctor never missed me, never, she had known me for years, never looked for me, never followed up. They sent me a bill for all the photocopies of my records, of course. That was hilarious. Um, and but never, not a concern. Never saw me again, never heard from me again. It was like, well, there was no great attachment there. She acted so happy to see me once a year for my annual checkups, but suddenly, nope, we're so concerned about your baby and never saw you again. Great, made my life easy. That was when we switched to the birthing center. I said, oh, dear Lord, now I'm committed to natural birth and I'm so happy and I'm so scared. I remember telling my parents, I remember saying I was very clear about what I was running from, but I didn't give a lot of thought about what I'm running toward. I'm glad I ran away from what I ran away from, but oh my goodness, now I'm here at a birthing center. I was so happy, but I was so nervous. And it was my doula who said, why don't you look into hypnobirthing? It's becoming so popular. I was with my first client over the weekend. I never saw anything like it. She swore by it. I took it as another sign. I did, just like when I saw Hensi Goer's book recommended. I said, this is another sign. I'm meant to see this through. And that's when we hired a woman to come to our home. She taught us hypnobirthing, which is what I've now taught to so many women. And the first day of our class with her, the first session with her, I asked her in all seriousness, I said, have you ever heard of a woman who went into labor and started hyperventilating? Because that's always what I envisioned. I always thought I would just freak out. And she looked at me with so much compassion. And she said, no, I haven't. And by the third or fourth session, there are five in the class. We saw her to the door. We closed the door, and my husband and I just stood and hugged each other and held each other at the door, feeling very happy, very relaxed. And when we released our hug and looked at each other, I looked at him, and this emotion, realization, thought swept over me that I've never lost since. I looked in his eyes and said, God, I feel so sorry for you that you won't ever get to experience having a baby. And he was just like, who are you? Because I was never that person until that moment. And I said, I know this isn't the easier path. And it isn't. It is so, so much harder being the woman. It is so much harder being the mom. There's not even a question about it. Nature designed it this way, but that makes us all powerful. I mean, the father could not even be alive anymore. And everything goes on without a hitch with the baby, the birth, the breastfeeding. But that mother can't get away for 3 hours when she's a breastfeeding mom. I mean, it's remarkable how dependent, how 100% dependent the baby is on the mom. But what a blessing. I mean, and I have two brothers, and I just remember thinking, no man will ever experience the most incredible thing. Like it just, so I've always been very grateful to be a woman, but it really got me in that moment.
Mm.
Um, so anyway, hypnobirthing statistics are always boasting that women who take hypnobirthing have very similar to the doula statistics, but in addition to all those good outcomes, very short births on average because of the techniques they teach you to relax physiologically and mentally. And I never concerned myself with a long or short birth. I was birthing in the birthing center now. I didn't worry about it. And here's what happened. I woke up at 4:30 a.m., March 3rd. My son is 19 now, 2005. And I was really thirsty. From 4:30 to 5 a.m., I was a little restless. My hip joints ached. That was strange. And I was really thirsty. And I'm a morning person. So once I'm up, I'm just like, I'm never going to go back to bed now. So at exactly 5 a.m., I felt it was officially morning and I could wake up my husband. So I woke him up and I said, I'm not in labor, but maybe don't go into the city today. I feel like there's a churning going on. I feel like there's an activity happening within me. So maybe it'll be today. Just maybe don't go in the city today. 3 hours and 1 minute later, I was holding my 8-pound, 14-ounce son.
Whoa, that is so quick for a first-time mom.
I woke him up. I said, I'm not in labor. And within 5 minutes, I was in labor like an on switch. down on my hands and knees, like, oh my goodness, there was no early labor that I was experiencing.
Right.
And had this strong instinct that I need to be where this baby is coming out. So I said, we need to go right away to the birthing center. We called, got the midwife I never wanted. She was never particularly nice or warm, never made eye contact. And we called and she was the one on call. And she said, look, you've only been in labor for a few minutes. I mean, I have to meet you there if you say you're going, but I just am going to send you right back home if you're not far along. And I had another surge in that moment. And I said, tell her we're going right now. So we gave the neighbor the key to walk the dog if we weren't home. I said, feed the dog by 4 p.m. if we're not home by then. We were home by then, but gave the neighbor the key, um, drove there. I got there at exactly 6 a.m. That's when we checked in. They had filled the jacuzzi tub for me and coaxed me in. They checked me. I was 6 centimeters. It was a very intense car ride. I was on my hands and knees. I was quiet. I was practicing hypnobirthing with every bit of focus. I mean, my years of yoga had really paid off. It's very similar to hypnobirthing. I was very focused, but man, it was very intense.
Mm.
And I was 6 centimeters when we got there, and I got in the tub, and 45 minutes of pushing, no tearing. I forgot to tell you, my doctor gave every woman an episiotomy. She said, everyone gets one who has a vaginal birth because I'd rather sew a straight line shut than a jagged line, Cynthia.
Oh, wow.
And here I was, no tearing, fast labor. It changed my life. It just changed my life. I mean, it was just like, boom, like Cynthia had the baby. And I just thought I could feel within me that this birth was not predestined, regardless of where I was going to have him.
Mm.
That every ounce of relaxation in my body, every bit of kindness from the student midwife who was there and gave me her beautiful smile, my husband rubbing my back, lunging into the tub on one leg, every bit of that, the doula pouring water over my shoulders, every little detail kept me right on track to my safest, fastest, and most comfortable birth. And it could have gone any other direction if I had been scared, holding my breath, watching my back, guarding myself, negotiating with the doctor, so being afraid of who's walking into the room. I surely would have had a different outcome. And I so want women to know this,
Yeah.
that you have so much influence over your physiology that it directly impacts your birth. It's not predestined. And if women could see that, because I think when they have a surge or a contraction, I think what we learn from television and everyone around us is we just have to get through it. Just get through it, because there's a certain number of these that we have to have until we have the baby. Not the way it works. If you're having a surge, don't resist and clench and tighten because your cervix is tightening. The birthing body has to respond with more intensity. If you relax into it, you'll now have fewer surges. So we have to welcome it and be grateful for that powerful body and do everything to stay comfortable. But it isn't the notion of get through it, because there isn't a predestined number we have to get through. It doesn't happen until we can relax enough.
Yes. Absolutely. I love that so much. And I love that you point out that everything around you supported you in being able to meet your contractions in that state of relaxation and surrender and allowing, because exactly what you said does make so many women get into that tension, pain, fear cycle, right? And I love that that's one of your biggest takeaways from that.
Yeah, you have to experience these things to discover them. You really do. This is when we have these eye-opening awakenings in life. It's only when we can't think and study our way through these things. I had done that. I had studied and read and researched. I mean, it's just my nature. It's like every time I read something else, it turned over another rock or two. And I thought, oh, now I have those things to research. It was just endless research. But I just experienced birth, and suddenly I had so much understanding.
Mm.
It was a completely life-altering experience in every possible beautiful way. I mean, I had my son. You know, they say you have a baby and you think you have the most beautiful baby in the world. When I had my son, every baby in the world became beautiful to me. Every baby. I just fell in love with humanity. I almost fell in love with all adults in a new way. Like I feel like I can look into the eyes of any adult, any cashier sometimes in the supermarket, I just have a moment of looking at them and I can feel this maternal thing rise up in me. I can see it. It sounds so, I don't know how this sounds, but this is my experience. There's a part of my mind that can channel seeing them through a mother's eyes and loving them.
Yeah.
That's what my son gave me when he was born. I used to get in an elevator in the building I used to live in when I was a young adult. And if someone got in with a stroller and someone else walked in with a dog, I was all over the dog. I was like staring at the dog. Oh, I love your dog. I love dogs. Oh my gosh, once you fall in love with humanity and you have a baby, I still love dogs, but my God, you can't even compare when you discover the love of a mother. No one can understand it unless they experience it. So that's what my son gave me. He made me a mother. And suddenly I just thought, that's it. I'm raising him. This is everything to me. And in addition to that, um, I couldn't stop talking about birth. I just couldn't stop talking about it. Everywhere I went, every person I encountered, I brought up my birth story. I talked about my birth story. I couldn't stop talking about it. I maintained my professorship at University of Connecticut for several more years until my daughter was born. But someone overheard me and my husband 2 years later at a New Year's party. There was a midwife there. And early in the evening, she walked by me. It was a very crowded party. She walked by me and my husband and saw me talking about birth to someone. And then after midnight, she walked by me again and saw me talking to someone else about my birth. My son was about 2 years old by now. And she stopped me and said, I'm a midwife. I don't know who you are, but like you should be teaching hypnobirthing because this is all you ever talk about. And I thought, teaching a childbirth class, like what? I teach finance. That is a crazy idea. And it was the most exciting thing anyone had said to me. So I knew I had to do it. And my God, thank God I did. It's just made my life so beautiful, this whole world I'm in now. But I quit my corporate job, raised my son. And when he was 3.5, he just started preschool, September of 2008. So I finally had a break, like 3 hours a day. And I started having dreams I actually had dreams I was having a daughter. Not that that mattered either way, but I did keep having dreams I was having a daughter. Um, Even what she looked like. I mean, I really, everything. And I said to my husband, I think we should have another baby. I feel like another baby is coming to us. And he was game. And again, we conceived on one try. And his last day of preschool was the day she was born. But something quite remarkable happened in that pregnancy. I was concerned about driving to the birthing center because of the distance now and my precipitous first birth. It was a long drive. I was like, gosh, this could be one of those babies born in a car. And I made the decision to have a home birth because at that point, I had already taught 400 or 500 hypnobirthing couples. And I had developed a high comfort level with home birth because I saw all these couples that I taught, most still birthed in hospitals, but dozens had home births. So my confidence level was a lot better than it was in my first pregnancy when I never would have considered home birth the first time around. And so because of that long distance and my concern about driving, we opted to have a home birth. I made that decision to have one. My husband was completely on board, whatever felt right to me. And at my 28-week checkup with my midwife, who's a very well-known author, midwife, she's very brilliant, she felt me. She checked me and said, well, the baby is breech right now, but that's okay. It's still early. And me, ready to be neurotic and anxious about everything, I said, Amy, why did you just say the word breech? She's like, no, it's fine. It's 28 weeks. It doesn't matter. And I said, I know it doesn't. I was all like, I know it doesn't matter. Why did you say it? Now it's in my head. And I don't know. I think I caused a problem for myself because at every subsequent appointment, she kept saying, well, your baby's breech. Now you're 32 weeks, Cynthia. Your baby's breech. We really want to see your baby turn now. 34 weeks, your baby's breech. We need to talk. We don't attend breech births. At 35 weeks, actually, she said, we don't attend breech births. We need to start talking C-section. I mean, it was surreal. I was teaching hypnobirthing every single month of that pregnancy. I was pregnant growing with all the women in my classes. So all these people knew I was pregnant. There was a lot of pressure. My son's birth story was published all over. Like, this is the woman who had the easy, lovely birth. And now here she is in a room being told she's got to have a C-section. Pretty incredible. So Uh, Before I tell you what happened, I'm going to share something really personal about this pregnancy that I think is relevant in this breech situation. When I first conceived my daughter in September, um, we found out we conceived. So happy. And on my birthday, October 11th, we had plans to go into the city that night. But in the morning, I was teaching hypnobirthing to a group of 10 or 12 couples, and they didn't know I was pregnant. And I showed up to work, and I mean, it sounds like I'm adding drama to the story, but I was actually wearing white jeans. And while I was unlocking the door for my class, 30 minutes before all of these beautiful couples showed up, I miscarried. I bled. I felt a sharp pain and I bled.
Mm.
I called my husband. My dad had just called to wish me a happy birthday. I called my husband. Oh my gosh, I just lost the baby. You know, I can't believe it. I'm teaching in 30 minutes. And my husband was like, it's okay. It's okay. We'll conceive again. It's okay. Are you all right? You know, so I hung up with him and I taught that class. I just had to like, we do this thing with our brain. I just had to switch gears, obviously could not put my woes on my clients. I sat with my legs carefully arranged, crossed while I taught for 3 hours. And as soon as it was done, I ran to a midwife and talked to her. And I said, I don't know, it sort of stopped. I don't know what's going on. She said, let's do a blood test. At least then we can watch your HCG levels. And in a few days, we'll do another one and we'll see what's happening. So I did that. And a few days later, did another blood test. And then she called me and she said, these are very unusual results, which is exactly what I didn't expect her to say. I either thought she'd say, yes, you miscarried, or no, you're fine. These are unusual results. She said, I would have expected your HCG levels to double or triple in this time period. And if you miscarried, they would decrease quickly. They've increased by only about 40%. She said, you're going to have to go get an ultrasound. So I had no idea what was going on. My husband and I arranged an ultrasound. We went, they checked me, and they found this perfect little heartbeat next to a little empty sac. It was twins.
Ah.
And incredibly, my daughter, who's so intuitive, when she was in preschool, like 3.5 years old, she was coloring at the kitchen table one day when I was doing things in the kitchen. And out of the blue, she sat up and said, I feel like I'm a twin.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm very close with Nancy Weiner. She's the world expert in VBAC. We're very close. I stay in her home when I go to Boston. She has been a godsend to me, a mentor to me. She's taught me half of everything I know. She's just been wonderful. In that pregnancy, when I was 16 or so weeks pregnant, my husband had a business trip in Boston. So I went with my son, went with him so I could spend some time with Nancy. I spent that whole pregnancy terrified about this other little baby.
Mm.
Like, does this one have a higher risk of loss because the twin did? Like, my mind went rampant. And I visited Nancy there. I was about, I don't know, 14, 15, 16 weeks pregnant. And we spent a few hours talking. And then I said to her, she said, do you want me to check? Do you want me to feel your baby? Do you want me to check you? And I said, yeah, please, will you? Please. I wanted to hear the Doppler. I wanted to hear that heartbeat. She's okay. Okay, come in here. Come lie down. Lie down. I'm going to go wash my hands. You talk to the baby. Tell the baby that I'm going to be touching you. That's Nancy. She came in the room and she felt palpated on my uterus. And she said, oh, yes, Cynthia, this feels perfect. This is exactly how a uterus should feel at this point in pregnancy. And I had a frozen smile on my face and said, oh, okay. Were you going to grab the Doppler? Can we just hear the heartbeat? And she said, well, Cynthia, a Doppler is just a targeted ultrasound. And I thought, oh God, she's so anti-ultrasound. She knows a lot about ultrasound. And I was like, oh no. And then she said, listen, Cynthia, this is your baby. This is your pregnancy. I have a Doppler right there. I'm happy to go get it. I'm happy to let you hear the heartbeat. But let me just ask you this. Where's the trust?
Mm.
And I thought, am I a fraud as a hypnobirthing instructor? Like, I teach trust. Am I authentic? Who am I behind the scenes?
Mm.
Because I'm teaching trust and I have an obligation to be authentic. And I wanted to hear that heartbeat more than I wanted to hear anything. But there was the moment, like, I'm going to remember for the rest of my life what I did in this moment. The song Who Am I from Les Miserables came to me. Like it's all this dramatic. It did really. Who am I behind the scenes? And I just said, I don't believe this. Okay, I'll trust. So now that became the story of this pregnancy because now here I was at 35 weeks with my midwife saying, we need to talk C-section. We don't do breech births. Your baby hasn't moved from this position in weeks. And I'll tell you, at birth, she was 9.5 pounds. So she was big at this point. She was probably 7.5 pounds at this point. So less likely to turn. And she said, can I schedule an ECV? It's our last shot. And I said, no. And she said, well, why don't I just schedule it with our backup doctors at Yale? And you can cancel it if you want, but let me just schedule it while you think about it. And I believe in ECVs. I support clients who get them. It is a last good attempt before scheduling or planning a C-section, even if you don't schedule it, which is I think a great approach. But she said, can I just schedule it? You can always cancel it. And something in me said, no, don't even schedule the ECV. And I don't know why. I didn't know what I was going to do. I called Nancy and I said, will you attend a breech birth? Because my midwives won't. She said, I'll see if I can. I'll talk to one of my partners. I'll see if we can come down to Connecticut. But I want you to try this and try this and try this and this and this and this. And I said, Nancy, I have tried everything. I have scoured the internet for the past month and a half, easily the past month. I swear that I don't think there's anything you can say I haven't already seen. And then on the way home, we stopped off at a place. I bought a green juice and I bumped into a client of mine who was still pregnant, who had taken my class, this beautiful young woman named Rebecca. She meditated every day. She was very spiritual. And she said, oh my gosh, Cynthia, I can't believe I'm bumping into you. I had a dream about you last night that you had the most beautiful home birth. And I could have cried. I just said, Rebecca, nobody knows this, but my baby is breech. And my midwives were just talking to me about a C-section. Like, you don't know how much I needed to hear this. So what happened was this. It was a Friday night, 4 weeks to the day, to the hour before my daughter was born. And Nancy sent me this short little text. Call my mentor, Valerie. She's in Utah. Ask her if there's anything we haven't thought of yet. And I thought, what on earth are the odds between Nancy Weiner, especially, and me, who's researcher of the year? What are the odds this woman can say anything we haven't thought of to turn this baby? But it would be very impolite not to call and follow through with Nancy caring about me so much and sending me her number. So I have to call. My husband had just run out to buy home birth supplies because the midwives give you a list of things you need in the home. So that was still our intention and our hope. He just ran the errand to be out to buy these basic supplies for the home birth. There I was alone. My son was in the bedroom asleep for the night. I called this woman. She answered the phone. Hello, like that. And I said, oh, hi, Valerie. My name is Cynthia Overgard, and I got your number from Nancy Weiner. And yep. Okay, what's going on? I said, well, I'm 35 weeks pregnant. My baby is breech. Did you do an ultrasound? I said, in fact, we did do one. Where's your placenta? I said, it's anterior. Okay, where's the baby's bottom? And I said, well, the baby's bottom, I can feel with my right hand on the lower side of my uterus. Where's the head? Head is like kind of under my my left breast. Okay, Cynthia, put me on speakerphone, lie down on your back. We're going to turn this baby right now. And I said, what do you mean we're going to turn the baby? I'm not sure I'm comfortable with this. I mean, can't I hurt my baby? I don't want to try that. No, it is impossible to hurt your baby. That's like trying to hurt a hard-boiled egg in a water balloon. That's what she said. I didn't believe it, though. I was very uncomfortable. But I kind of dutifully listened. I put her on speaker. I lay on my back. All right, Cynthia, take your right hand and find your baby's bottom. Take your left hand and find your baby's head. And she said, I want you to push up on the bottom and push down on the head at the same time. And I tensed and I was like afraid to do it, afraid not to do it, afraid. I was just kind of trying, but resisting and nervous. And I tried for many minutes. And finally I said, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. And then I said to her, and again, I don't know how this came out of me, but it did. I said, for some reason, every cell in my body is telling me that the only person in the world who could do this is my husband, and I don't know why. And she said, well, call me back when he gets home. So he came home very shortly after. And I said, Eric, I've something, a very unusual request. And I told her what happened. We called this woman back. We put her on speaker. She said, Eric, I want you to kneel over Cynthia. Find your baby's bottom. Take your time. Take your time. Find your baby's bottom with one hand. Find your baby's head. And she said, push up on the bottom and push down on the head. And he didn't do that. He just applied very gentle pressure, and he didn't do any of that. He just put his hands on me. I had my hands behind my back, like in repose, grinning at him because I thought this is the silliest, wackiest thing we've ever done. And he just very still just held his hands on me. And if you could watch him on high-speed film over the next 10 to 15 minutes, you would have seen his hands change position. The hand that his right arm was high up by the baby's head, and you would have seen that hand go low down. You would have seen his left hand go up. And I recognized his hands were moving, but I thought, oh, poor Eric, he's kidding himself. He's getting his hopes up. He thinks he's doing something here, but I've heard how ECVs are so painful, and this is the most, I'm not feeling anything. This is comfortable. This is slow. I'm not feeling anything happening. And he turned his hands all the way around. And he looked at me and he said, I think I just turned the baby. And all of a sudden, I felt all these kicks where I was supposed to be feeling kicks all along had she been properly positioned. It was like this validating kick, 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 demonstrating she was head down. I sat up and I said, oh my gosh, we think it worked. We think we turned the baby. We think it worked. She said, yep, okay, I told you. Yep, good luck to you. Bye-bye. And she said, I told you. And she said goodbye and hung up. It was just hilarious. It was nothing to her. It was just nothing. Like, yeah, I told you you would.
Wow.
We told my midwife, we called her and said, we think we just turned the baby. And she said, oh, really? Okay. Great. Can I, I know she didn't believe it at all. She's like, do you mind if I drive down to just visit you tomorrow? And I was like, no, yeah, sure. Come on by. Come Saturday. Yeah, sure. Come on. We'll be home. She drove an hour to see us. She sat in the kitchen for a while. So then what happened? Okay. And then what happened? Uh-huh. Okay. That's great. Yeah, that's really great. Okay. And then she said, so Cynthia, want to just lie back? I'll just feel everything. I said, yeah, sure. Come on over. Went in the living room. I laid on the couch. Eric sat across the room. She leaned over me and felt me. And neither he nor I will ever forget this. She sat up and looked at him, and all the blood drained out of her face. Her whole face just kind of went gray. And she just said, how did you turn that baby? And that's when we realized she was incredulous. She couldn't believe he did it, and did it so painlessly, comfortably. She was head down. On my son's last day of preschool, June 5th, 2009, it was a Friday. I picked him up. Everyone was saying goodbye to each other for the summer. And a friend saw me. I was huge. She said, how are you feeling? And I said, I kind of feel like I might be in labor right now. I'm not sure. She said, what? I said, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just feeling like things are starting. My daughter was in my arms, 9 pounds, 7 ounces, 6 hours after that. I went home for an hour or two. I was pacing around. I said, I just might be in labor. I don't know. I'm only 39 weeks, but sure, that's perfectly on time, I guess. Called the midwives. That's the day I met Trisha, my wonderful, dear friend and co-host on Down to Birth. This was the blessed day that we met in our lives. I was in labor. She was the attending midwife. She had a shirt on that said Yale Midwifery at your cervix. I loved her and her beautiful, warm smile. And the midwives were wonderful. We filled a tub at home. My son was present. 17 minutes of birthing my daughter in my arms. And that's the birth story of my daughter.
You had 17 minutes of contractions?
Once I was 10 centimeters, she came out in 17 minutes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Of pushing. Yeah. It was intense. It was very intense. I didn't tear again, but it was intense. Yeah, I was very limp in labor. All the photos of me, I was a completely limp, hypnobirthing style limp. My hands were soft. My mouth was relaxed. I was like mushy face, soft lips. But, you know, the adrenaline comes in when you're 10 centimeters. The energy comes in, and man, that was intense. That was very, very intense, but gratifying. And I got to birth her on my hands and knees, which is exactly how I wanted to birth my son. But they had asked me to flip around, and I obliged. I always wished that I didn't, because it's a great position. I like that one. But yeah, those are my stories. And thank you so much for taking an interest in asking, because it's really fun to look back and share them, Anna.
You brought so much more than your birth stories. You brought so much wisdom creeping into everything that you've shared so far. And before I let you go, if you had a first-time mama in front of you right now who's about to have her first baby, and she really wants to have a natural and empowering birth experience, what advice and pearls of wisdom would you give to her?
I think what I would try to convey to that woman is, you're the adult now. I work with these young adults all the time, and they still perceive their parents as the authority figures over their lives. And when you have wonderful parents, it's easy to do that. You trust them. Like, nobody loves you more. It's a beautiful thing. We need our parents so much in our adult lives. We need them just, I think, for decades of our adult lives, if we can all be blessed to have that. But you're the adult now. And these women, it's so hard for them to realize that in just a mere 6 years, they're going to be having to go talk to a school principal, advocate for their child here, deal with that. You have no choice but to become an adult in the full meaning of the word in the process of being a mother. You have no choice. You could have a baby at 17 and you are going to be a full-on empowered mother in the process of raising your child. You don't have a choice. The child needs you to be the parent. So become the parent now. When you become the adult now, it changes everything. You stop perceiving others as your authority figure. Your partner is also not to give birth with you. It's just the most beautiful, beautiful bonus when you have a loving, supportive partner. But you, like it or not, this is your experience solely. And your physiology determines where you need to give birth. So if you walk into a hospital and stiffen and say, I hate hospitals, why would you ever give birth somewhere you hate? And nor should your partner ask you to. If you can't bear the thought of birthing at home because you can't even imagine birthing at home, you don't feel safe, then do not birth at home. You have to now learn to listen to your own instincts and make your own decisions because you want to have a baby. So stepping into motherhood is to be a full adult in the most empowered meaning of the word. And when you really do that, this process becomes so much easier and so much more exciting.
Absolutely love and adore that. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as The Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.